George Armstrong Custer rode into history and perhaps infamy on June 25, 1876, when he led the 7th Cavalry into the valley of the Little Bighorn River. He was among the 268 dead 7th men who were lying on the grassy slopes above the river by the following day. However, George wasn't the only Custer to fall that day. 2 of his brothers, a nephew and a brother-in-law, also died with him. One of those brothers, Tom Custer, was the first man to win the Medal of Honor twice. Despite his remarkable achievements, Tom has remained largely overshadowed by George. The 2 brothers perished together at the Battle of Little Bighorn, but the term Custer's Last Stand is almost exclusively associated with George Armstrong Custer. Thomas Custer was born on March 15, 1845, in New Rumley, Ohio, nearly 6 years after his brother George, whom he preferred to call Armstrong. At just 16 years old in September 1861, Tom received his parents' permission to enlist in the 21st Ohio Infantry. Meanwhile, George had graduated from West Point in the war-accelerated class of June 1861, becoming a cavalry branch officer, though barely passing with a record 726 demerits. Tom started as a private and had to work his way up the ranks through sheer determination and hard work. As a close-knit bunch, the Custer brothers enjoyed pulling practical pranks on one another. When the Civil War began, 16-year-old Thomas enlisted as a private in the 21st Ohio Volunteer Infantry. His older brother George, known to the family as Audie, had been accepted into West Point in 1857. With the outbreak of war, his class graduated early and was commissioned in June 1861. George graduated at the bottom of his class and held one of the worst conduct records in the Academy's history, showing complete disdain for his lessons and constantly testing the rules and boundaries. After receiving his degree, he joined the cavalry and was commissioned as a 2nd lieutenant. Battle flags were essential for battlefield communications and signaling during the Civil War, and they greatly raised morale among soldiers on both sides. "Rally round the flag" was more than just a catchphrase. It was taken quite literally. Regimental flags were a source of immense pride for soldiers and officers, inspiring them to exceed their own expectations. Consequently, these flags were fiercely protected in battle, with flag-bearers revered and often defended to the death by their comrades. Capturing an enemy battle flag was one of the most challenging feats in Civil War combat, requiring immense initiative, extraordinary courage, and a great deal of luck. Tom was an officer in the Army of the Potomac's 3rd Cavalry Division, under Colonel Henry Capehart's command, when he captured a 2nd North Carolina Cavalry flag at Namazine Church at the start of the Appomattox Campaign. He reportedly rode his horse over a wall, ripped the flag from the standard-bearer's hands, and ordered the surrounding rebels to surrender right away. 11 soldiers and 3 officers complied. Even though Tom's horse was shot, he amazingly survived. After the battle, a rightfully proud Brevet Major General George Custer, commanding the 3rd Division, wrote to his wife Libby, "God has blessed us with victory." Tom, in the most gallant manner, captured the battle flag of the 2nd North Carolina Cavalry. He then accurately predicted that Tom would receive a Medal of Honor. Tom repeated this brave feat at Sailor's Creek 3 days later. Under heavy fire from entrenched infantry of Lieutenant General Richard Ewell's corps, he charged on horseback, engaging several rebels with only his pistol. Spotting a standard-bearer rallying the enemy, he shifted his focus. According to what Colonel Capehart wrote Libby Custer, "We encountered a supporting line after passing the temporary works line in the flank road. It was from this second line that he wrested the colors single-handed, only a few paces to my right. As he approached the colors, he was shot in the face, which knocked him back on his horse, but he quickly righted himself in the saddle. The color-bearer reeled as he extended his right arm to seize the flag. The man's heart must have been punctured by the bullet from Tom's handgun. Captain Custer grabbed the flag out of his hand and bore it away triumphantly as he collapsed. The injured Tom, his trophy waving, sprinted back toward his own lines in all his boyish exuberance. "Furling that flag or they'll fire on you, Tom, for God's sake," exclaimed an officer with the 3rd New Jersey Cavalry, concerned that Tom would be taken for a rebel commander. Still wearing his wound-related blood, Tom rode up to his brother and the commanding officer while carrying the enemy flag. "I got my flag, Armstrong, even if the darned rebels shot me." He let out a cry. Preparing to re-enter the fray, Tom was stopped by his shaken older brother, who ordered him to report immediately to the field surgeon. When Tom seemed inclined to ignore the command, George ordered him arrested and escorted under guard to the field hospital. The wound, though bloody, was not fatal. The bullet had traveled from his lower jaw to his ear without severing any major arteries. It was serious enough to require further treatment and left Tom with a noticeable scar for the rest of his short life. For Tom Custer, the war ended just 3 days before Lee's final surrender at Appomattox. By the end of the conflict, he had been promoted to brevet lieutenant colonel, and his heroics at Sailor's Creek earned him a second Medal of Honor. He was one of just 19 soldiers in American history to have received the medal twice, making him the first soldier to do so. After the Civil War, Tom Custer, like his brother George, was sent out west. He was appointed as a first lieutenant in George's 7th U.S. Cavalry Regiment. Tom was wounded during Custer's well-known Washita Campaign of 1868 in a battle against the Cheyenne. He also fought in a skirmish against the Lakota at Honsinger Bluff in August 1873. It was following this engagement that Tom encountered his nemesis. Rain in the Face, a war chief, was the head of the Sioux War Party, who ambushed Custer's soldiers at Honsinger Bluff. When it was revealed the next year that he was lodging at the Standing Rock Reservation, bragging about having killed 7th Cavalry Senior Veterinarian Surgeon Dr. John Honsinger and flashing Honsinger's gold watch that had been stolen from his corpse, Lieutenant Tom Custer was dispatched to apprehend the chief. Rain in the Face swore to rip out Tom Custer's heart and devour it. When the combined Sioux, Northern Cheyenne, and Arapaho hamlet at the Little Bighorn was attacked by the 7th Cavalry 2 years later, Tom Custer was his brother's aide-de-camp. A few days before the momentous day of June 25, 1876, Tom penned a letter to his young niece expressing his eagerness to conclude the campaign and the enjoyment they would share that winter. Unfortunately, he would never get the chance to fulfill that promise. On that fateful Sunday, atop a hill overlooking the Little Bighorn River in Montana, Tom stood alongside his comrades and kin in the final struggle of their lives. As the battle raged on, Tom remained close to the lieutenant colonel's side on Last Stand Hill, leading a small group of 10 men. The precise details of their last stand remain shrouded in mystery. As enemy warriors closed in on the dwindling group atop the hill, a handful of soldiers, untouched by wounds or death, continued to resist. According to one account from the indigenous perspective, a wounded officer clad in buckskin, possibly Tom, was seen near the crest of the hill. Despite his injuries, he attempted to fire a final shot from his pistol, but was swiftly silenced by enemy fire. In the aftermath of the battle, the bodies of the soldiers were subjected to the customary mutilation by the indigenous warriors. Those who had endured the longest and fiercest fighting suffered the most brutal treatment. Given Tom's courageous nature and the trauma of witnessing the deaths of his 2 brothers and teenage nephew, it's conceivable that he fought with unparalleled ferocity until the bitter end. When General Alfred Terry's troops discovered Tom's remains days later, his head had been brutally battered, reduced to a mere inch in thickness, and his body mutilated. He was identified only by the tattoo TWC and an eagle emblem on one of his arms. Initially laid to rest in the same grave as his older brother, Tom's remains were later relocated to Fort Leavenworth, Kansas the following year. A simple military marker, adorned with gold trim reserved for Medal of Honor recipients, now marks his final resting place. While George Armstrong Custer rightly holds more fame among the Custer brothers, Captain Thomas Ward Custer, though technically leading the regiment's C Company, served alongside George as his aide-de-camp, often overshadowed by his older brother. However, Tom Custer also deserves recognition. He was a resilient and courageous individual. Despite his incredible heroism and sacrifice, history has often overshadowed Tom's legacy with that of his more famous brother. But today, we remember Tom Custer for the warrior he was. His courage, his spirit, and his ultimate sacrifice deserve recognition and honor.